So Andrew Kane is a much valued and respected member of the research staff at the Ulster Historical Foundation. He joined us in 2017, and no case was too tricky or complex for him. He was prepared to take on all of those really difficult searches, and as well as doing that, he has managed to produce an absolutely stunning book. I think Stephen captured it really well, describing it as a game changer. It's an absolutely magnificent volume. First published last December, sold out very quickly, and has been reprinted. It lists all 16,000 plus townlands in the 9 counties of the province of Ulster, giving information on the civil parish, the Church of Ireland parish, the Catholic parish, the barony, the poor law union, and much else besides. And among really the most attractive features of the book are the maps, showing the network of estates in the province of Ulster, all beautifully coloured and referenced. So to produce a book like this, you really have to immerse yourself in the subject. And that is what Andrew has done. It's an absolutely magnificent volume and testimony to the meticulous way in which he has approached the subject. So again, our congratulations to Andrew for producing this book. And I'm now going to invite Andrew to come and give a presentation, which is titled Townlands, the Local Heroes of Genealogy. So Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you, William. I'm just going to check my phone to make sure it's not switched on. So, right, welcome all, and thanks for turning up to sit inside in a darkened room on that beautiful morning. Yes, well, William said it all really about the background to the book and so on. So I'd just like to talk you through why I think townlands are so important, and they really are the heroes of the work that we do, because you're turning to them all the time. Not only that, they are local in the sense that they are the most local administrative unit that we have here. So I really think that local heroes term really applies to them. So welcome. On our website, this is the definition given of a townland. It's the smallest administrative territorial unit in Ireland, varying in size from a single acre to over 7,000 acres. And it talks about it comes from the Gaelic dispensation. They were used then as basis of leases in the estates and for valuations, tithes in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now, the most important line for me on that is they survive as important markers of local identity. But they are actually much more than that. Within living memory, they were your address if you lived in the countryside, as most people did, and everything would have recorded what townland you're on. It was really your local identifier. So how far back do they go? This is an extract from a grant of land to a monastery outside Downpatrick in 1183. And this, from about here on, that is just a list of townland names. They are hard to read and they're slightly changed from how we would pronounce them today, but they are clearly recognizable and can, because of the fact that they're in order and they sort of show swathes of the County Down countryside, you can see that they're complete in terms of the townlands that we use today. There's no gaps. There's no extra ones that really, really clearly relate to the townlands that we know today, and yet they were in the land grant hundreds of years ago and were clearly understood by the local people as boundaries of an estate. So why have these lasted so long? Well, they are based on the natural landscape. They all refer to rocks and streams and ditches and so on. Everything is based in the landscape. There's no artificial straight lines. like you quite often find in estate papers and state maps where things are ruled up for convenience. And this is a little, at the bottom is a little extract from the civil survey in the 1850s, where it shows the boundaries of these townlands are described in terms of rivers and so on, and everything is pretty clear, and mountains and so on. So you can actually see where they are on a map, even if they didn't have townland map boundaries on it. The other big reason they survived is taxes. When I was doing my degree, I did law, and my tax law tutor always said everything in life has a tax aspect. And that's very much the case with townlands. In the pre-plantation system was that the Privy Council in Dublin and Dublin Castle would have, when it was raising a tax, it would have split the tax among the counties, and the grand jury in each county then had to come up with the money to Dublin. So what the grand jury does, it added any local expenditure, and it split the liability proportionately between the various baronies, which we'll come to in my maps, and the baronial assessor then divided it into townlands, how much of the tax was due from each townland on a parish by parish basis. So this is the whole of the medieval period where Dublin Castle's rule extended to. The townland system was very much part of that tax system. Because they were so local, it made valuations relatively fair, and because it worked so well, it just permeated every aspect of the administration. So it really got used for everything. We have an explosion in records from the 17th century, from the plantation period, basically, and afterwards. With the flight of the Earls and the confiscation of all the forfeited lands of 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster, we find lots and lots of materials which have survived, and they all refer to townlands. So here's a list of the major documents that I have used from that period. Inquisitions, which we'll come back to most of these things. Where they haven't mentioned townlands, I have ignored them, and if they don't provide much information, we'll skip over those. But these are the various records, and because none of them cover the whole of Ulster, but between them, they'll give you a couple of sources of all the ground in Ulster, so you can compare them. So this is the Inquisitions. For anybody whose Latin is good, they can read. That's Kilolta estate around Lisburn. The Conway family owned it back in the 1620s, and it lists all the townland names here in that estate. So you can compare those to the modern day townland map and map them to it. So you can see that if you live in a townland, that you can see how far back it has gone, and that it meant something to people back in those days. Then the forfeited counties, Josias Bodley came over and mapped all the counties where the land had been forfeited under the flight of the Earls. And he was the one who came up with the idea of doing a map for each barony, which I followed, and were followed in the various other surveys that we'll see later on. It gives you a scale that fits on a page, but yet the name of every townland can be readable on. And that's really what I was going for. So you can see here, I have taken, this is South Derry, and close to where I grew up. In fact, there's where I grew up there, Kilray. And I have each of those townlands that were named in the Bodley maps correlate to one townland. There are very few exceptions where there's maybe one that has been split, but very often you'll find on the Bodley map it says something like the 2 Collinses. So then you'll find that there are actually 2 townlands there now. But this map, although it looks tremendously impressive, was not surveyed on the ground. The guys who took down the names went round and made notes in a notebook, and then they were sent too bodily to make the maps. So he sometimes gets them a wee bit wrong. But at least you know that he's all the names there as they were known in that period. Difficulty with mountain lands, but nonetheless, all the productive land and most land is covered. It's a fantastic resource if you can find it over 400 years old. Then the names that were contained on the maps were then used for the grants that were made under the plantation. So you can see here all the names are then listed here in the grant to James Matchett of Kernan Estate in North Armagh. And all those ballyboes, as they're described here, are townlands that we can recognise on the modern maps today. After the plantation lands had all been granted, again, we're back to good old money for the government. They thought, right, okay, these people are not complying with the strict conditions that we have put on them for their grants of land. So they thought, what better way than find out, make a list of what they're doing wrong so that we can fine them for it. So this Irish Commission of 1622 is the most comprehensive of Pienaar's survey, comes before that, and there are various other local surveys. But it is fantastic for names, particularly in counties Tyrone and Armagh, where it will give you all the people with leases in a particular townland and so on. Fantastic information for tying families to townlands back in the 1620s. And really, really exceptionally good. Next, I'm missing out things like the muster rolls and so on, which are really good sources for family names in the 1630s, but do not have townland addresses. That's for a talk on estates, so we'll maybe do that some other day. But the civil survey here was under the Cromwellian authorities. They sent out surveyors to determine what the denominations of land were and whether they were subject to forfeiture. And then just basically for the settlement of debts that the government owed either to soldiers or to others. So 50% of the forfeited land was to go to the soldiers for back pay, and the other 50% was for people that the government owed money to for other purposes. So you can see that this lays out all the names of the townlands and who the owner was, but is very, very poor on what size they are and details like that. You can see here, the one on the left is forfeitable land, so it's got a bit more detail. The one on the right is unforfeited land, so it belongs to, in this case, the Drapers Company of London. So it's just a list of names and a rough estimate of the acreage involved. So then along comes Sir William Petty, who is my hero. He took over. He thought that the civil survey details, the surveyors had been really poor at their job. So he said, right, I could do a much, much better job than this. And he has produced, they're available on Trinity College Dublin website, a lot of the surviving ones. There's some that aren't on that site that are available here in Prony. A lot in the west, Donegal, Tyrone, Londonderry, all those counties are, and they're really, really fabulous. Colourful maps like this here on a barony basis. That's the barony of Dunluce, North Antrim. And then he has a parish map for each parish to show the townlands, and they are extremely well surveyed. And this is the reason he chose townlands, and this is from the instructions that he issued to his surveyors. They want to have surveyed and ad-measured all the forfeited lands into the smallest and lowest denomination. That is to say, townlands, quarters, ploughlands, etc., proper to usually known as or observed in the various baronies and counties where the lands do lie. What we would have called townlands here, they would have been tates, say in County Fermanagh, or various other names were used in different parts of the country. So they were to record the metes and bounds, the actual boundary line of all of these small denominations were to be recorded by walking, and they were to be then confirmed and sworn by 6 local jurors who knew the lie of the land. The acreage then was precisely measured, and it was divided into arable, pasture, meadow, timber, valuable timber, that is, shrubby wood, bog and waste. And it was measured by chain, and they used 21 feet chain, was a plantation perch, which is longer than a normal statute acre perch. And it was confirmed by angles. So he was using the triangulation and measurement by physical chain back in the 1650s, which is how the Ordnance Survey measured it until they had satellite images and so on. And not only that, but each parish was done by a different surveyor, so that the jigsaw all had to fit together. You couldn't say this area was smaller or not do your line correctly because the guy who was doing the one next door, if your line didn't match up with his, there was trouble. So a very, very comprehensive and excellent survey. And here you can see some of the results. This is the parish of Ballyachran, Portstewart, on the north coast. And you can see those boundary lines do fit extremely well with the modern Ordnance Survey maps. And the precision with which he has measured them is their Crossrae that's Crossrae West, and it is 111 acres, 1 rood and 4 perches, of which 2 acres, 2 roods and 32 perches are bogland. So I mean that we're getting into real nitty-gritty there. But unfortunately, he only applied this to land that was potentially forfeit, or woods that might be of use to the government, Crown lands and the Church of Ireland lands. These were all part of the estate of the Earl of Antrim, so they were keen to get their hands on it. Now, I just love looking at these maps. This is the map for Kilfeatrin Parish, and you can't see, but you can see the up at the top. It says the 6 quarters of Ballytearam down here. Now that area is now covered by, I think, 22 modern day townlands. So not only are these not 4 quarters in this town, but there are 6, very unusual. Then he lists all 7 of them. Bizarre again. And then we can see which townlands are within each of these 7/6 quarters of Ballytearam. So you can see the names carry forward: Curra, Ballyclough, Ballytearam itself, and so on. The names are recognisable as part of the smaller unit, which we now use as a townland. These smaller units were not unknown at the time of the survey, but because they were all part of one estate and one person's lease or so on, there was no point in distinguishing them on the map. So people often think, have these townlands appeared from? No, these are old names, but they are parts of the townlands. So then the Down survey was a Cromwellian exercise to take away all this land from people who had fought royalists and Catholics and Church of Ireland hierarchy and anybody that Cromwell didn't like. And so then after the Restoration, people the king was back in power, so obviously his lands weren't going to be confiscated, and a lot of the owners whose lands were forfeit under Cromwell came back and made claims for the re-entitlement to their land. These were recorded in the Books of Survey and Distribution, there's a copy here in Proney. Ansley of Castlewellan was the head of the commission that dealt with this matter, and he had a copy of the books at home in Castlewellan Castle, which the family have since given to Proney, as a result of which, the Dublin Castle copy is presumably lost. But it's been microfilmed. You can consult it here, and it covers a huge area of Ulster. It lists the confirmed owners from the civil survey. It adds in the Down survey map references and proper measurements, and then it lists who the confirmed owner in the restoration settlement is. So you can kind of trace what's happened to an estate over a 30, 40-year period by the time everything was settled. And here we have some from the microfilm upstairs, and you can see here on the left is forfeited land. It belonged to John Cormac and various other people down the left, and down the right we can see some of it has gone to Michael Cole, some of it John Cormac has retained a portion, and so on. You can see there that how the lands have been divided up. And then on the right hand, oh no, sorry, that is the unforfeited. That's why John Cormac's across and Michael Cole also across. So here we have, again, this is the one we saw in the civil survey, James McHenry, just outside Coleraine. And you can see down the right hand side, the Earl of Antrim has got some of his lands back there. And John Rowley of the Irish Society has some lands and so on. But the land has been divided up. And again, really detailed measures of the land and what the quit rent was. It's all about getting money out of people. That's why we've records. And so I then looked at how the words on the Down survey, remember we looked at the Ballyteeram example, where there was Ballyteeram was divided into these 7 named areas. Yeah, that's 21 or 22 townlands today. So I took the Down survey details of certain lands that were the dower lands of the Countess of Antrim. Actually, she would have been the Marchioness of Antrim at that time. But this is her, down the right-hand side is her claim that, yes, this land was forfeited under Cromwell, but I want it back. And this is her description of it. She talks about the quarters of Monancloch, Taray. She talks about parcels and 20 acres of Nesson, which was referred to as a parcel in the Down survey. And then there's the half town of Moyarget, which is split into 2 now, and so on, all the way down. There's all these different words used. It's only there at the bottom you get the townland of Bonamargie. And whereas if you look at the Down survey, that's the half town of Bonamargie and the half town of Turnacrowan, which I've never heard of, but presumably if you come from Ballycastle, you might well know, particularly if you live in Bonamargie. So you can see there that these units have similar descriptions. The Earls of Antrim would have known their land very, very well. They've been there for hundreds of years already at that stage. And so, you know, you're seeing how these different names apply. The precise acreages show that they're different, and that does the quarters and parcels and half towns and so on don't really necessarily refer to a particular size, but they do have a meaning in the context of the old denominations of land. So what I did then I took the Down survey and I traced what they had as townlands in green over the top of the black townlands of a modern day map. And again, the vast majority of them are a confirmed match. You've got a townland called Bandura. There is, in the Down survey, there's a place called Bandura. The only place you get certain things is sometimes you'll have the quarter of something, and you'll discover them whenever you look at it in this map. There's maybe 3 townlands within that. And so I tried to build up a picture of how what we recognize as townlands today were recorded in the past. They're all there in their old names, but just what were they called and how did they fit into the scheme of things? So yes, so then I came up with this simplified Gaelic land structure. There's various other people have including Thomas, I believe you've got a good one as well of this, but this was my understanding, so it's just very, very simplified. The Ballybeta was an area of maybe, I don't know, 12 to 20 townlands, and that was the basic estate within the Gaelic system. Then quarters within that where basically a lot of them are a quarter of a ballybeta. The ballybow is the smaller version, and then the parcels are described as trians or sessias, or these are basically fractions. Trian a third, sessia a sixth. And the notional acreage of these was taken to be, ballybeta was 1,000 acres, so a quarter, about 240 acres. A ballybow was taken to be 60 acres, and so on down the proportions. Now, whenever this was the pre-plantation way, land was divided up. So whenever it came to the plantation, basic estate in a plantation grant is 1,000 acres, notional acres. So guess what? But you already have a system set up. You don't have to start from scratch in making up these equivaluable plantation proportions. You already have the system in place. So then moving forward in time, after that sort of explosion of records in the 1600s to the Ordnance Survey, and this is the Select Committee of Westminster Parliament, the Survey Evaluation of Ireland, which took place in 1824. And this is the report. The report of this committee led to the setting up of the Ordnance Survey in Ireland and the mapping, the 6-inch mapping of the whole island, which was such a groundbreaking piece of work. And basically, what they were there for was all to do with tax. They just wanted to find a more equitable way for apportioning the tax burden. And they concluded that this was impossible without highly accurate maps. And they dithered over whether they would go for every field would be measured to a very precise level, but they came down eventually to townlands. This was going to be their unit because it was the unit of assessment for grand jury taxes, as we saw going back to the 1550s. And it was also cheaper. Although for the second series of Ordnance Survey maps beginning in 1846, they did include the field boundaries. So as I say, the Ordnance Survey then covered the whole of Ireland, and Richard Griffith, famous for his valuation, he acted as a boundary commissioner for this survey from the very start. So he was involved in marking out where the townland boundaries were right from the beginning of the Ordnance Survey's involvement in it. Now, here we have the memoirs which they produced alongside the maps to record all the information which couldn't easily be put down on a map. Fabulous resource. It was intended that it would cover all of Ireland, and the one on the left for the parish of Templemore, Derry City, it was the only one that was actually published at the time. But the Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's then produced all the other ones that the materials survived for in the 90s. The thing was that as they got further away from the north coast, they got the fewer and fewer resources were committed to it. They were running out of money. So if you have a parish up on the north coast, brilliant, you're getting lots of information. But by the time you get to Armagh and Cavan and so on, it's very, very, very... The whole of County Donegal is covered in 2 volumes, whereas this volume that you see on the screen, the original one only covers 1 parish, and the other was Lisburn and South Antrim. So there's sort of a few parishes, but it's a small area compared to the Donegal ones. Now, John O'Donovan was the preeminent Irish scholar in Dublin at the time, and he was contracted by the Ordnance Survey to help with the naming, how to write down the names of all these places. And we know there that the townland spellings that are recorded in the Ordnance Survey are not in a lot of cases, they're not what the locals write down that townland name as. Townland next to where I grew up was called Carnrow, C-A-R-N, but in the Ordnance Survey it's Carnrow. But in actual fact, when you look into it, John O'Donovan got it right. It is Carnrow because it's on the side of the ban where there are fishing weirs, and that's what Carn means. There is no Carn or Cairn. So the local people called it something different from what the actual derivation of the Townland name. And he did a lot of that. He went and he visited every parish in Ireland, and he interviewed people, and he required all the surveyors to get, I think it was 3 distinct versions of the name from the people who lived there, and all the written instances they could find. And then he worked on that to find out what he thought the correct spelling should be based on the pronunciation at the time. Again, we find that our pronunciation doesn't match how people spoke back in the 1830s. But I think it's interesting to note that he writes here in a letter from Mahara near Kilrea, the more I look into the traditions preserved among the peasantry to account for the names of places, the less I think of their title to historical credit. I need not remark what an imperfect mode of transmitting knowledge, oral tradition, must necessarily be in consequence of our human love of the wonderful and wild. But he then spent the next however many years dealing with the oral tradition and trying to take it back to something that actually tied in to something that he could find in history. And the oral tradition has a huge, huge role to play in preserving our townlands and interest in local places. So how do you find your townland? Well, up until, I'm not sure what year the birth certificates and death certificates stopped having a townland name on them, but certainly within the 100 years rule, they all do. Now, the government has the Stormont has a policy that they are to use townlands names as often as they can. The individual departments don't necessarily have policies, but the Rates Collection Agency, Land and Property Services, they do. So if you look at your rates bill, it will always tell you what townland you live in. Births, as I say, births, marriages and deaths, census returns, anything that you will be able to find will mention a townland name, because that was people's basic address and everybody knew what their townland was. And it was a very precise definition of where you lived. There was no street numbers outside of cities and towns. You just lived in a townland, and the postman knew everybody in that townland, and so on and so forth. So yes, so here it is marked on a death certificate. Here it is marked, and even in towns, we're in townlands. Everywhere's in a townland. So you can see here the various sources, and everything relates to townlands. Very useful resource is on the PRONI website, the Historic Maps Viewer, and you can see, you go in through, search the archives online and come into the map, and then you can zoom into any part of Northern Ireland. What I like about it really is, on this side you have the 1830s map, and you can see all the houses and buildings individually marked. And here you have the modern day map, which has all the street names and numbers marked on it. So you can say, right, okay, there's that house that my family lived in 1835, and it's now number 61, whatever this road is. So it's a fantastic way of relating the past right through to the modern day. Again, another website that does that very well is the Griffiths Valuation section of Ask About Ireland. You can look up the indexes, find people's names, what townland, what tenement or farm number or house number they're on. Then you can feed in the satellite map and see what it looks like today. See if there's a house there. You might be lucky, it might be a named farm or something like that. But it really gives you, comparing the modern day with an actual piece of history that you can relate to names back generations ago. So I thought I had hidden this slide, but again, this is the same, tithes. Not a lot of people know that there are quite a lot of information to be found from the tithe maps, the FIN 5B2 series. I would say probably less than 10% of the, if you look at the tithe book, which is available online, you can see the numbers down here, 655, 656, etc. Then you can go to that parish or that townland in the maps here in the Fin 5B series, and you can see some of them are marked individually, some of them are marked in groups, like maybe 80 to 90 here, and then you've 520 here, you can see it. So it just depends on various things to do with the annuities arising out of tithes, that kind of thing. But sometimes you will find a map marking the exact farm going back, in this case, to 1825. So I always say to people, the golden rule is follow the townland, and particularly before Griffith, just every single reference you can find. This is the old e-catalogue, I believe. So you just go in, search, put in the townland, but don't forget that it could be spelt any number of ways. And even if, as I always say, even if you don't find your family in the documents, always read the documents, because there'll be people in the documents who are not mentioned in the index. And even if you don't find your relatives, you'll find out you'll learn about the lives they led and the environment they grew up in. So it's valuable piece of information. And again, you can follow it forward, you can follow it back. This is back to Pender's census of circa 1659, and it lists townlands. This is basically a poll tax list. So it lists those people who have to pay the higher rate of poll tax, and then for the ordinary pleb in the street, which was everyone male and female over the age of 16, it lists how many of them there are, English, etc., and Irish. So sometimes I find, so it gives you an indication of what sort of a structure society had in that townland, even though you have to be a higher rate taxpayer to appear in the list of names. And for vast majorities of townlands, there's nobody. You can go through parishes, but there's nobody in that column. Again, the Registry of Deeds, it's on microfilm upstairs, or it's also on the Family Search website. It's indexed in two ways: landlord, or grantor as it's called, so the person granting the lease, and the place index, which is basically a list of townlands. The great thing about the landlord index is that it is in strict alphabetical order, and it's been written out at the end of a period of collection, so it's neat, it's easy to read, strictly alphabetical, fantastic. The only problem is you don't know if your family were subtenants of somebody who was a tenant of the person who owned the townland, so it may not. It's a bit of a long way to go around it, but it is easy to read, which is a massive help. The other one is with the place names. What they have done in this case is for each period, for example, the first period is from 1708 to 1729. So they will have opened a book for each county. They will have a section for each letter of the alphabet. So I was looking for somebody who lived in the Townland of Eden, and for a talk I was giving in that part of the world. And I then that's E, starts with E. So you go to the E in the book, but it's not alphabetical within the list, and it's not even all the Edens will be together. It basically is the first person to come along in 1708 who had a townland beginning with E in County Londonderry in their deed. They were the first one down. Second one was the second deed that was registered, and so on, all the way through. Sometimes they will have written in extra ones if they notice that they've already used the name. Sometimes you'll find the same townland appearing in 3 or 4 different places in the list. I picked E because it was a nice short list and well spaced out. A lot of them are really scribbly and squashed in and are very, very difficult to read. You have to do a bit of guesswork deciphering the index. So then with that information, you can look up the memorial on the website or in the microfilm, and it'll give you all this fabulous information about the tenants, the neighbours, the witnesses, the acreage, and very often these are leases for lives. So you will find the names of children and their ages and how they're related to each other and so on. Fabulous source of information, and I would really recommend wasting months of your life on that website. It really is addictive. You just get in and you go, oh, right, okay, oh, it could be that one, look at that. So yes, but it's really fascinating stuff. Okay, estate papers, again, all based on Townlands. This is for the allocation of the estate to the Ironmongers Company along the side of the Ban, Nahadui area. And you can again see I've put in the modern name. Vast majority of Townlands were originally there. Occasionally there's one there. Mullahinch, for example, has a couple of Townlands. Ring Rash doesn't exist as a separate townland with its own name, but the vast majority of them do. And it really shows the continuity. And again, I've divided these up into the Ballybeatas because the grant lists the Townlands by Ballybeata. So you can see which Ballybeata each of the Townlands falls in under the green line, and the names are in green. And then that's the list of all those Townlands, and there's the Ballybeatas down the side. Then immediately after the grant here in 1613, the Ironmongers are in place. This is one of their earliest rentals, 1616. Who would have thought that you could look up in here, go upstairs and find out who lived in your town, possibly find out who lived in your townland in 1616. And it lists it by Ballybeata, it lists all the townlands then separately, who the head land or leaseholder within the townland is, and then who the subtenants are. So it's a fantastic resource for people who live in the Nahadui area, and it really is very interesting that it shows the mixture of Gaelic, Irish names and English names and so on, really kind of all mixed in among each other and so on. It really gives you a whole different view on the plantation period. So then moving past Bodley, then Petty, and now this book. We all do these barony maps because of the convenience of doing it. So I've tried to show on the face of the map the names of all the townlands in a readable form. Also the boundaries that you might need for your research. Parishes for looking for church records, estates for looking for estate records, and then the index to each of those gives you other poor law, probate district, all that kind of stuff. But you can see for me, I find it very difficult to conceptualize where places are, how things relate to each other just by reading a list of names. It's really, really valuable to be able to look and say, right, okay, such and such a townland is in this estate, and this other one is, but right next door to it is a completely different estate. That gives you somewhere else to look and things. It really helps, and you can see that some estates are split up really all over the place. The dark blue, there's bits of it in different parts of the country, particularly in County Derry, because the 12 guilds of London were each allocated an estate which was exactly the same value. They valued each townland. They sent valuers out, and then they made a list, and they tried then to fit in so that everybody's estate was worth exactly the same, which means they were hugely different in size. The Ironmongers was really spread out because there's a massive amount of church lands shown in pink. This isn't that area, but all the maps show the church lands in pink. It had several estates belonging to the O'Kane family as well, the original Gaelic family that had owned the county. And so they're splitting up all the estates. You tend to think of a plantation estate as being sort of a blob, and everything within that area belongs to that estate. That's not the case, and this really helps you come to terms with that. And then this is just the various information that I have included about each townland. The Ordnance Survey map number. Prony, you could help whenever yours index. It's really hard to find what Ordnance Survey map number you're looking for when you're looking for old editions, particularly like tithe maps and so on. You end up looking at about 5 maps before you find the right one. No longer. it gives you then all the parish and registration district for looking if you're doing a search on Irish genealogy or Groney. Again, the size, the estate, and so on. And I have included the landlord who appears in Griffith's valuation to give you an indication of how the estate, where the estate has got to over the years, the estate being based on the plantation period and the Griffiths being a mid-19th century version. Again, what was I going to say about that? So this is just an example I've done for Maze when I was giving a talk in Lisburn, and you can see there's all the information. The map, that's the map in this book. Then your county, your parish, so on, all the way down. And you can see who the landlord is. And in actual fact, Kilwarlen was the Hill families. The Hill family had bought Kilwarlen estate off the O'Neills in the early 1600s. So you can trace that all the way through. I have, when I was compiling the index for the book, I had an enormous spreadsheet with the name down this side, how it was spelt in all those different 17th century sources, and what names appeared against that townland in those sources. And then further on, it was, sort of the Pender's census, the hearth money rolls, everything led across, and then Griffiths was sort of the last one. And I thought, that's an awful lot of information to try to squeeze. My index was already over 200 pages, and that would have, I think, quadrupled it. So yeah, not so. So what is your townland is a question I always ask, because it really is a very personal and local thing. They go back years, centuries in history. They are still used. They're still used on our, as I say, all the government is trying to push them again after sort of suppressing them for the last 50 years. And but they're very personal. But that's what I love about them. You know the size. If you grow up in the country, you know what fields are in what townland, and you kind of know where the boundaries are and everything. So you can know every field of that townland, and it's something that you feel a connection to, and you know that unit has survived, existed for so long. They really are just a very, very, very tangible link to history, because you can walk in among them. And they are very much on the up and up now, thanks to people like Anne-Marie, who have done so much to publicise them and to bring people's attention to the interest that we can have. So this is my townland here. This is from the map of pre-plantation map of the Mercer's estate in Kilrea, and the name Culdrumdrina was the name of the townland then. It's now called Cool Hill. So the drum has been translated loosely and the drina has been dropped, but it's still very recognisable, as are all the other local townlands around me. So, any questions? Stunned silence.
I'd like to thank Andrew for a fabulous presentation, and I think he has clearly demonstrated why townlands really are the heroes of genealogical and local history research. Yes, Andrew has indicated that he is happy to take a few questions. So does anybody want to?
Sure. When you start out with your immigrant and you're looking at the records in America, you're looking at that. How would most of them refer to where they came from? If he comes over and he's talking to somebody, even his friends, is he a dairyman?
Yeah.
Is he a certain townland? How did he refer to that? Is there?
The answer is it depends who he was talking to. If I go to the States and people say, "Where are you from?" I'll say Belfast, because they'll at least have heard of Belfast. I'll not say I was born in the townland of Cool Hill, because that means absolutely nothing to them. But if I was in Kilrea and somebody said, "So where do you live?" I'd say, oh, Cool Hill, and they'd know where that was. So it really depends on the knowledge of the person you're speaking to. But very often you find people name farms and houses after the townland they came from at back home. It means a lot more to them than saying they're from Derry or Belfast or whatever. It's really personal. So they would definitely, to people who knew what they were talking about, they would have identified with their townland. But speaking to other people, they would probably have said the nearest place that they reckon that person will have heard of. The other problem is a lot of people would have gone, you always get people, oh yeah, our family story is that we came from Derry. And very often they've passed through Derry port on their way to America. And that has been misunderstood by the generations in America, meaning that they came from the city. But they could have come from the city, they could have come from the county, or they could have just been passing through. That's very, very difficult to know.
When you have such tiny clues.
Yeah.
The only clue I had was what the old people had said. Well, he came from Deering, Ireland.
Right.
And like I said, he was illiterate. This was in 1840 period. So that's the only thing you have to work for.
Yeah.
So one of the things I thought maybe was there were other conflicting parts of it.
Yeah.
One other question is I have a problem with a little on Townlands. There's upper and lower.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean upper and lower. So
it can do if there's a stream. If there's a yeah. Oh, certainly, yes. The question was the confusion about townlands that are named upper and lower. It's not particularly to do with elevation, but very often it'll be up. Well, usually it will be the way the water flows. The higher one will be upper, usually. But there's a lot of big and more, or little and big, that kind of thing, which don't tie into the size of the townlands. The number of such and such bag that's bigger than more that I've come across is unbelievable. When bag means little and more means big. So yeah, it's hard to know. Also, people will have referred to, as I was talking about the quarterlands and all that kind of stuff, and Ballytearam being the prime example. If you said you came from Ballytearam, you could have meant, or if you see it in a document, it could mean the entirety of the 6 quarters of Ballytearam, or it could be the individual quarter, one of the 7 that were listed, which was called Ballytearam, or it could be what's now called the Townland of Ballytearam, which is only a third of the quarter of Ballytearam, or a 22nd of the whole thing. So, it depends a lot on context. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of some of the townlands around Ballytearam whose names don't appear higher up the hierarchy. But you could go, oh, my ancestors lived in such and such a townland, but I can't find it anywhere. Well, that's because you need to look under Ballytearam to find it, because it's how it's been recorded.
Raise her hand up, and then Thomas's hand as well.
Okay.
Thanks, William, and thank you, Andrew, for such an illuminated talk on registries.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering how unique we are in terms of other parts of the United Kingdom and even the rest of Ireland in terms of the level of Townland, 16,000. Is that replicated anywhere else?
Well, the system is replicated across the island of Ireland. There's over 64,000 townlands in total. So we have our quarter of them. So yeah, but there are, yes, there are some occasional examples elsewhere, but it's quite uncommon to have such a level of named place that rather than just saying, Gibson's farm, and then people will know for a couple of generations that's Gibson's farm, but if Gibsons sell it 50 years later, nobody knows where Gibson's farm is. So, it's great that we have that system where the names have been preserved and that there are boundaries that were set down so long ago and not really changed, apart from, as you say, maybe splitting into upper and lower or so on. So yeah, it is very unusual. I don't think that, I think, I've thinking back to some reading I'd done on Townland, on postcodes against Townlands, and how somebody was arguing that there are parts of the west of Scotland where they have something similar, but it has been totally, it's gone. And there was somewhere else in Europe, I think it's somewhere in Scandinavia, where they have something similar. But that, Finland maybe, but it's quite unusual.
Thomas?
No, mine's not a question as such, it's just to say massive congratulations.
Thanks.
I have a question. Do you need counselling after? Or?
I still need counselling. Yes, I survived it, yes. And actually, just on that, it's, as anybody who has ever written anything or published anything knows, it's still a work in progress. I could have been working on that for another 10 years and there would still be mistakes in it. So please, 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 if you notice something that I have misinterpreted or got wrong or left out, or there's a lot of, particularly in the estates indexes, which I didn't do an awful lot of in-depth research on. It was just to provide a sort of overview for users. Anything that you can give me that I can put in so that any further additions will be even more useful to researchers, very, very much appreciated. So,
Pat? Go ahead, Pat.
Just a comment, but that's not a question. That's the large upper and lower.
Uh-huh.
Lower is the northern land division. Strange enough that what they call lower is usually is the northern division of the Townland.
Right.
And upper is the southern.
Yeah.
For some reason, I think that the south of the country was seen as the top. For some reason, and that holds with baronies. Parishes and the upper.
I wonder.
The lower section is the northern section.
Yeah.
And the upper section is the southern part.
Yeah, I kind of thought maybe it was. It's good to know that that's a route or a kind of guideline. Yeah, because I'd always thought that it kind of, because we all drain, practically all of Northern Ireland drains into the Bann, which flows north. I kind of thought, and also I'd grown up beside the Bann. Everything goes that way, goes downhill to the north. Yeah. Upper parts, the
northern.
Yeah.
Lower Dungannon, southern, which is logic.
That's people from Tyrone for you. That's why I put my hand on this side. In recent times they've remained static. Since the Ordnance Survey in the 1830s, that was them fixed on paper, on stone forever. But even before that, as I was saying about the Down Survey, William Petty's survey, they went through very much exactly the same procedure as the Ordnance Survey did 180 years later. So, and there was, interestingly, I was reading a history of the Ordnance Survey, and they were going, there's always a case, a surveyor always comes to a point where there's two people saying, oh no, it went down this stream, the other one goes, no, it went down the other field. He's always going to make a judgment call on that, and because it was the Ordnance Survey, and that's now fixed. So in that terms, they are making a new dividing line, but not really. They're picking between options rather than deciding we won't split the difference. We'll decide it is down that hedge or it's down that hedge, kind of thing. It's funny, at the end of the road where I grew up, there is a huge triangular patch of scrubby woods. It comes to a point at the end of our road, and alongside of the main trunk road, it just gets wider and wider up until the next corner. And I kind of asked in my innocent youth, why do the farmers not use that piece of land? It belongs to the townland on the other side of the road. They straightened the road, and there's this wee bit of that townland is on the wrong side of the road, and it's not worth the guy on the other side of the road farming. It's just gone wild. So. Mm-hmm. No, because it's 3 Irish miles from the centre of Coleraine. So that's and again, it isn't really the actual line drawn by the Ordnance Survey isn't a exact arc of a circle, but that was the basis of it. The boundary line was to be within 3 miles of the centre of Coleraine.
Yeah, I just want to make a point, Andrew. Ordnance Survey Northern Ireland did minor amendments to the
Right.
and for instance, what we're saying at the minute
Yeah. Yeah.
But also, around Port Rush, they have to keep amending the boundary because Port Rush has to stand it in their area.
Yeah.
They could change the boundary a couple of times, but they also do not put the boundaries around Port Rush.
Right. Right.
So the laws about mechanism for the incident of climate change, I think with other things, what we're explaining about it, and probably want to do that explain.
Yeah.
Maybe some places have actually kept it on the screen. So the laws, change is done.
Although, I mean, there are parts of there's a lot of Port Rush in County Derry.
Yeah, there is now, but
so, yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, probably. It's all about taxes. It's all about taxes. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's one more obscure sections of the the other thing is going to be historically something that a lot of movies doing for the that's the one you could say the Townland now run around from the farms.
Mm-hmm.
Big horses.
Yep.
That was actually a number of different Townlands.
Yeah. 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 And there are a lot of place names within Townlands as well, moving down that list, where if the quarter has become the Townland, the Ballyboes, the names are still known to the locals. And I was up in Kilrea yesterday and showing some Canadian relatives around places that associated with the family, and the family used to have a farm in a place called Ballyquin, which isn't a townland. It's actually part of Balnacalia Beg, but so people don't know that. Only the people who know it know that the river. There's a mill there, and the one side of the river is Ballyquin, and the other side is Balnacalia Beg. But it's a lot of those little place names are lost in time, but local people know them, farmers know them. They're on estate papers sometimes and things like that there.
You said in reference there that Kilwarren was owned by the O'Neills.
That's right.
Did Constantine McGuinness not sell Hillsborough and Kilwarren to the hills?
I'll just check that. There's now that you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I just believe everything that's in this book. Where's my states? Okay. I do know that there is, here's the light here. Oh, no, it's not going to go on. It doesn't, I know, okay, Kilwarren. Warren is 256. Note number 72, which says, I apologize. It says 11 townlands were purchased from the McGuinness family by Moses Hill in 1611, and 32 more added by his second son Arthur. McGuinness is correct, not O'Neill. I just, in my head, I just assumed because of where it was that it was part of Clandyboy. Right. Well, credit to the McGuinnesses there. They sold it to Moses Hill. So there you go. So this book knows more than I do. Buy the book.
Correct. Well, look, thank you very much again, Andrew. Thank you very much. Now,